Artillery fire is raining down on Hamas targets in Gaza City at a dizzying pace alongside non-stop Air Force bombardments and illumination flares. There have also been reports of tanks in the city center after weeks of preparations for Operation Gideon's Chariots B, which included hitting Hamas's high-rise towers and the departure of hundreds of thousands of residents. In another diplomatic news, the United States is losing patience and sharpening its tone against Iran, while Iran feels humiliated and intends to take revenge. Overnight between Monday and Tuesday, the IDF opened an unusually intense wave of strikes in the Gaza Strip as part of Operation Gideon's Chariots B using aircraft and tanks. According to reports in Arab media photos, the strikes caused a mass flight of residents from the city of Gaza, and tank movement began inside the streets. At the same time, President Trump warned Hamas not to place hostages as human shields. As they were announcing the launch of the ground incursion, the IDF and the Shin Bet also revealed that 21 senior commanders of the Palestinian Islamic Jihad organization were eliminated, including sector commanders that are responsible for weapons productions and more. Hundreds of additional terrorists were eliminated in the past half year. And meanwhile, in a post that he published after the start of the powerful attacks in Gaza City, the United States president wrote, "I have read reports that Hamas moved the hostages above ground and is using them as human shields. Do not let this happen. Otherwise, everything is on the table." Backing up his boss, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio declared, "This war has gone on long enough. Hamas must immediately release all the hostages." And according to Al Jazeera, Hamas responded with a statement in which it condemns the United States alongside Israel. And speaking of Hamas, almost a week after the assassination attempt on the terror organization's leadership in Doha, these men who were responsible for the attacks and supposedly have survived still have not appeared in public. And in a related story, the Arab Emergency Summit in Doha is now over, and the sharp statements made by the assembles and the leaders that were part of this meeting are still ringing in Israel. Every friendly state that have signed normalization agreements with Israel had harsh criticism against Israel. But there was little talk of practical steps that these governments were planning to take against Israel other than a call to consider suspending Israel from the United Nations. The Ministry of Defense of Israel announced that it is in the stages of formulating and establishing a Supreme Amendments Council, which will enable dramatically accelerating Israel's readiness against Iran and also against Yemen. In the northern arena, an Air Force aircraft directed by the Northern Command of Israel struck a terrorist organization headquarters in an area of southern Lebanon over the last 24 hours. And further afield, the United States is losing patience and sharpening its tone against Iran. In a speech at the annual conference of the International Atomic Energy Agency, the United States Energy Secretary called for a full dismantling of Iran's uranium enrichment program. This is your daily update about everything that's happening in Israel on day 711 of the war against Hamas, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shia militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region that are taking their orders from Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guards. Let's start with the news from the Gaza Strip, where the IDF struck Hamas overnight between Monday and Tuesday with great force via the air. This is an unusually intense wave of strikes, and according to the Arab media portals, not only planes were used, but also attack helicopters and tanks. The echoes of the explosions were heard as far as central Israel. The IDF has completed preparations for carrying out the intensified ground maneuver in Gaza City, and the assessment is that about 340,000 residents have now left the city. A security source said that the appearance of IDF tanks convinced many residents who had been unsure if this was the real thing that the time had come for them to leave. Around 9:30 on Monday, illumination flares were fired over Gaza City in an attempt to flush out Hamas fighters, so that they will leave their hiding places and go out into open spaces where they can be targeted by the artillery and the Air Force. According to reports, the strikes were being carried out in three main areas: the Shahadwan neighborhood, the El Karma neighborhood, and the coast and Tel El Hawa. In Gaza City, there were reports that in these neighborhood booby trap robots are also being used and heavy airstrikes are being carried out. As of now, the IDF concentrated during the day large forces, including columns and tanks in several areas in the north and in the center of the Gaza Strip. Large forces are expected to take part in the maneuver based on 4 divisions: 36, 98, 99, and 162. The IDF will employ almost all of the standing brigade arrays, as well as several reserve brigades, as the maneuver is expected to last a very long time, at least several months, and the safety of the hostages and the soldiers will stand at the top of the fighters' priorities. In preparations for the Ghana incursion, several high-rise towers in Gaza City were taken down via airstrikes in order to deny Hamas the high ground in the coming fight. But several thousand heavy-armed Hamas fighters remain in the city. Some of them combat refugees from different areas in the past 2 years, while others are young and untrained, lacking skill and military experience. According to intelligence estimates, they are led by the Gaza Brigade commander Gideon El-Hadid. There are reports that he would like the end of this fighting, but he will not permit himself to raise a white flag, as some of Israel's political echelon will hope that he would. Therefore, Hamas has booby-trapped entire areas around the city and in the main routes within it. In parallel, Hamas plans to move forces throughout the underground infrastructure that is dug beneath the city, the terror tunnels to move from place to place, and try to harm the IDF forces by firing anti-tank missiles or attacking charges to the vehicles. The armored vehicles and others, as it did in Jabalia about a week ago in the Canoons, also during Gideon Chariots No. 1. The IDF also understands that Hamas will try to achieve a tactical achievement that will lead to a strategic move to an attempt to abduct soldiers during the battles. This pattern has already been seen in previous battles in Canoons and elsewhere in Gaza. The IDF has their full scent drills and strict orders that soldiers are obligated to move in iron pairs everywhere, from performing a zig, opening a room in combat, to administrative a movement to bring food from one point to the other. Also, to keep the soldiers sharp, it was determined that each combat cycle will be time-limited. And in related news, just before the start of the intensified ground maneuver in Gaza City, the Shin Bet and the IDF announced on Monday evening that in recent days they terminated 21 key militants in the Palestinian Islamic Jihad terrorist organization in Gaza. The IDF says that hundreds of militants in this organization have been eliminated as part of the activity against the terrorist organizations in the Gaza Strip over the past half year. Chief of Staff Al-Zamir issued a statement on Monday at a ceremony to honor outstanding soldiers, saying, "We will continue to pursue and hunt Hamas operatives as an ongoing mission and as a calling so that future generations will know I will pursue my enemies and overtake them. And I will not return until they are consumed." This is the conception. There is no containment. He also acknowledged the increased risk to the hostages in the coming days, saying, "Our moral duty is to return them to their homes and to avoid harming them." And here at Alpha Daily Updates, we will continue to bring you all the updates on the fighting in the Gaza Strip. This war is far from over, and for thousands of families in Israel, the struggle continues on a daily basis. As a few hours after the start of the IDF's powerful attacks in that location, United States President Donald Trump threatened Hamas by linking to reports about moving hostages above ground to be used as human shields against the strikes. In a post on his Truth social media network, Trump wrote, "I have read reports that Hamas has moved the hostages above ground and is using them as human shields. I hope the leaders of Hamas know that what they are getting themselves into, if they are doing that, this is a human horror. Do not let this happen or else everything is open. Release all of the hostages now." Minutes after that post by Trump, Prime Minister Netanyahu thanked him with a post saying, "Thank you, President Trump, for your solid support for Israel's war against Hamas and for the release of all of our hostages." However, Hamas also had something to say in response to President Trump's statement, saying he is biased towards the Israeli position and that he is in general being very unfair to Hamas. May I remind you that this is a terrorist organization speaking, now talking about fair and not fair. But I want to hear what you have to say about all of this. So let me know in the comments. Is President Trump being unfair to Hamas by telling them that they're out of order to use hostages that they kidnapped as human shields in their battle with the IDF? Really? Let me know what you think, and make sure to give a click on the subscribe button in the meanwhile. Moving on to the diplomatic news. Leaders of Arab and regional states arrive in Qatar on Monday for the Arab Islamic Emergency Summit, a week after the Israeli strike to eliminate the Hamas senior leaders in Doha. And during the summit, the state leaders harshly condemned Israel one after the other, and in the end they called on all the countries of the world to reassess the relations with the Jewish state of Israel. The first speaker was host Qatar's Emir Tamim bin Hamd Al Thani, who received a big embrace following the strike both in the region and in the entire world. During his speech, he said the capital of my country was subjected to a treacherous Israeli strike aimed at a building where the families of Hamas leaders and their negotiating delegation resided. Our citizens were surprised, and the whole world was stunned by the aggression and by the cowardly terror. The Israeli war in Gaza has become a war of annihilation. Doha hosts delegations from Hamas and from Israel, and our mediation has brought about the release of Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners. Leaders that are present at the summit included heads of states that are members of the Arab League or the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, including, among others, Iran's President Masoud Pezeshkian, whose country itself struck the American base in Qatar last June in revenge for the strikes on the nuclear facilities. Also making an appearance at the summit was Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, King Abdullah II of Jordan, Egypt's President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, Lebanon's President Joseph Aoun, Syria's President Abu Mohammed el-Gulani, and Iraq's Prime Minister Mohammed Shia el-Sudani, in addition to Turkish President Erdogan and Palestinian Authority Chairman Mahmoud Abbas Abu Mazen. From the Amorites came Mansour bin Zayed, the Emirati Vice President. The President of Egypt said that the summit is taking place against the backdrop of serious challenges, and Israel seeks to turn the region into a place that can be attacked. The strike in Qatar is a serious violation of international law and creates a dangerous precedent. I warned that Israel's unrelenting behavior will escalate the conflict and undermine stability in this entire region. Israeli chaos and growing arrogance require us to work on principles that express our shared vision. Israel must understand that its security and sovereignty will not be achieved by force, but by respecting the law and the sovereignty of other states. Turkey's President Erdogan claimed that the growing Israeli aggression has become a danger that threatens our entire region. The aggression against Qatar has brought Israeli arrogance to a dangerous level. Netanyahu's government seeks to continue the massacre against the Palestinian people and drag the region into chaos. Israeli politicians repeat what is called Greater Israel and must be brought to there according to the international legal mechanisms. Brought to justice. And amidst all of this fiery rhetoric, it is very important for United States Secretary Marco Rubio to make clear during his visit to Jerusalem on Monday that nothing has harmed the relations between Israel and the United States of America. Washington supports Israel, and although it did not like the Israeli strike in Doha, this did not change the America's basic position that all 48 hostages must be released and Gaza must be freed from Hamas, a terrorist organization. The Americans wants to keep all options open, as far as I know in Rubio's meetings with Netanyahu, there was no attempt to stop Israel from taking control of Gaza City. The Americans understand that the operation is on its way, but they still believe that Hamas must be destroyed, and perhaps the Qataris can be utilized to lead to a hostage deal that will bring about a ceasefire in this war. Doha is Rubio's next stop on this regional tour, and the timing of this visit is very interesting. So to make a brief comment of my own about all of this, the rhetorical speeches made by regional heads of states in Doha on Monday are unpleasant for Israelis to hear for sure. But the fact is that no one wants to quarrel with President Donald Trump of the United States. And there is a clear message from Rubio's visit to Jerusalem that America has Israel's back. It is interesting to note that in this context that Rubio's recent statements about Qatar indicate that he is still hopeful that Doha will be helpful in brokering a deal between Israel and Hamas. And there's also talk of finalizing a military partnership between Qatar and the United States on this trip. And furthermore, the prevailing assessment in the international community is that despite Qatari anger and the attempt to organize a broad international front against Israel, Doha continues to be committed to its role as a mediator and is still interested in conducting negotiations for a deal between Israel and Hamas. Think about it. During a joint press conference with Rubio, Netanyahu's messages were sharp. Israel is committed to the release of all the hostages and the defeat of Hamas. The action in Qatar cannot yet be called a failure, as we are still waiting for the final reports. And in any case, the Israeli message got through. There is no immunity for terrorists anywhere, and we have not yet seen any proof of life, any public appearance from the leadership of Hamas that were the targets of this attack. With all of that in mind, let's back up just a bit to Sunday night, when in a discussion held by Netanyahu on the topics of the hostages and against the backdrop of the fighting in the Gaza Strip, Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Derm assessed that the Hamas terrorist organization is still interested in negotiation and is expected to return to the diplomatic track. It added that Qatar, for its part, seeks to continue serving as a mediator and does not intend to suspend itself from this role, since it is important for it, for the international prestige, being in this spot, being the international mediator in this school. On that note, it's important to remember that although Qatar is fuming with frustration, humiliation, and rage about being hit with military strikes for which is completely helpless to give a military response against Israel, as options are very limited. It had immense wealth but little diplomatic standing, and that is in general in a weak position in the situation. So it cannot allow itself to withdraw from the mediator role precisely now, when it holds the keys to the diplomatic track between Israel and Hamas and the Middle East. Abandoning the process will harm its relevance and lower the political capital that they still have over the years in this region and the world. Therefore, in the end, it will likely swallow the insult, maintain rhetorical prestige, and continue to hold the mediation portfolio. The assassination attempt in Doha exposed again the old-new rules of the game. The talk is meant to come, to stroke, and to broadcast business as usual, but the actions are what tell the real story. Basically, talk is cheap, especially in the Middle East. In the end, as always, policy in the Middle East is determined not by what is said in front of the cameras, but by what is done quietly beyond the enemy's lines. Alpha Daily Updates will continue to report on every development on this issue. So, keep spreading the truth, share, and follow us. And make sure to hit that subscribe button to help us grow and reach more people and have a bigger impact in sharing the truth. We want to give you everything that you need to know about what is going on in Israel. Now, Israel is switching his focus to some other fronts in this war after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's dramatic statement on Monday acknowledging that Israel is heading towards a diplomatic isolation and the possibility that arms and trade restrictions may be imposed against Israel. The Ministry of Defense announced that it is in the stages of formulating and establishing a Supreme Amendment Council, which will allow Israel to dramatically accelerate its readiness for future